Hello, I'm Athena Buxton and I'm the Education Coordinator for the Hunter Museum of Art, and today I'll be walking through how to screen print using some simple materials you might have in the house. I'm currently not in my own house, I'm actually at the museum. We are open now Thursdays through Sundays, so if you want to take a look at some of the artwork that inspired this activity, I welcome you to come visit the museum. We have some beautiful work up in our new temporary exhibition, The F Word, including the work that inspired today's activity, PTG 70 HMA by an artist group duo by the name of ChanSchatz, who made a very large, beautiful screen print based on information they took from people who live in Chattanooga. So I'm going to change the camera down so you can see what we're doing today. So to get started off, I just have a piece of paper here, and before I do my screen print, I'm going to sort of come up with a design I want to do. Since it's fall and Halloween is coming up, I think I'll do a little ghost. So now that I've taken my marker and did my little design for my screen print, I'm going to take an embroidery hoop. I just have a tiny one here. You could also use a picture frame. And I'm going to cover it in a cloth. So I have this thin mesh fabric I took from an old dress that doesn't fit anymore. You can use something similar. You can use tulle. You can even use pantyhose. Those work really well if you have an old pair that's filled with holes to do something like this. And I'm just going to cut off some of the excess here so it's a little bit easier now that I've laid it on top of my embroidery hoop. And when you're working with an embroidery hoop, there should be sort of an inner embroidery hoop and then an outer one which has this little metal bit on the end to tighten it. You want to lay the cloth over the inner bit without the metal. So I'm just going to lay that on top, and then I'm going to put the other half of the embroidery hoop on, and I'm going to tighten it. And then taking my scissors, I'm just going to cut away some of the excess fabric on here. There we go. You don't have to be perfect with this. You're just getting it out of the way so it's a little bit easier to work with your hoop. Once I get the rest of this fabric out of the way, I'm just going to put all this scrap fabric to the side. And then to make sure this cloth is taut on the hoop, I'm just going to pull on the edge till I don't see any more wrinkles on my hoop. The taunter the fabric, the better. It makes it a little bit easier to do this. Now that I have that on, I'm just going to lay my hoop on top of my little drawing. You want to make sure you're laying it on the side that's flush with the edge of the embroidery hoop. And then I'm going to take my Sharpie and then just trace out my design. I'm using a pretty dark cloth to do this, so it's a little bit more difficult to see, but if you're doing this on a white or nude colored cloth, it's pretty visible. Okay, drawing my little eyes for my ghost. Okay, now that I got my design traced out, I can actually move this away, and I'm going to flip this over. When I flip this over, my design actually becomes reversed. That's important to remember when you're doing any type of printmaking. The design usually gets inverted when you actually go to print. So if you're going to use words, make sure you write the words backwards when you're doing design. So if I were to want a ghost with boo, I would write, instead of writing boo this way, I would have to write it this way. So when it got inverted, it would make sense. So now that I have my design drawn on my fabric, it might be hard to see in the video, but I can see it under the light. Here, I have some glue here, specifically wood glue. You can use most types of glues to do this, as long as it's non-washable glue, so any glue that is water soluble will not work. You have to use something like Modge Podge, wood glue, all-purpose glue, just not your standard Elmer's washable kids glue. And I'm going to add some red paint to this. This is just acrylic paint. Just going to add a few drops of that. And the point of the paint isn't, it's not really there to do much, it's just to change the color of the glue. Wood glue and most glues have a tendency to dry clear, which makes them really hard to see as you're painting this on. So adding a little bit of paint on it helps you see where you're working. So I'm going to take this paint, and using a little paintbrush, I'm going to apply it to everywhere I don't want in my design. So I want the body of my ghost to show up. So I'm just going to paint all around him. I think I'll call him Greg the ghost. And if I want Greg to show up when I'm printmaking, I need to get rid of all this. And with the glue and the paint, what you're essentially doing is, on thin fabrics like this, there are spaces between the threads that form these little holes. And you're using the glue and the paint mixture to essentially fill in those holes. So when you go to print, the ink or the paint you use to print with won't go through those holes. They'll only go through the selective spaces. So I'm going around and printing, painting. And I'm making sure I do the edges first and trying to get as smooth an edge as I can. And if you want to get a really clean transfer, you can probably do a few layers of this just to make sure you plugged up all the holes. So, painted his little eyes. And once I have my design all filled out, I'm going to hold it up to the light and check to make sure that no light is going through where I don't want it to go through. So holding up the light will help you tell if you put down enough glue or paint. If you can see light coming through any spot where you don't want ink to go, then you need to go back and fill that over. Now I'm just going to leave this to dry. It'll take a couple hours. But just to show you the next step, I did a screen a little bit earlier of this cat that already had time to dry, so I can go ahead and print with it. So this one's completely dry. It's really solid. I use the same mixture of like wood glue and acrylic paint, except I use green paint. I held it up to the light to check to make sure there's no holes, and you can pretty much see your picture kind of floating in the middle of it, and that's what you want. Now I'm going to take some sturdy paper, flip this over so that it's flush with the tabletop and the paper, and I'm going to take some black acrylic paint and put it at the top of my design. Now, taking a plastic card, I'm just using an old grocery card here. I'm going to use it like a squeegee to push the ink down and drag it. The less times you push the paint down, the better your transfer will be. So the goal is to have to do this once. Since my design is kind of big, I'm going to have to do this twice, and I have a really small card. I'm going to have to do it more times than I want, but I'm going to try to push down really hard and press paint through those holes. You want to be pretty generous with your paint. Alright, and then to the other side. Alright, I might need a little bit more paint to get the tail. You can also use block printing ink if you have it. I just went for acrylic paint because it's nice. So once I've got that out, I then can peel this off of the paper and I have my print. And you can see that it's inverted from the picture. The cat's tail is facing the opposite direction. And you can do this as many times as you want. I actually did this a few times and I made 2 other prints earlier today. And when you do your first print, you want to do it on a piece of paper you're not too attached to, just in case it doesn't come out right. Sort of like, you know, making pancakes. The first pancake you always throw away. The first print is usually the worst one. So once you go through it, you'll get better transfers. Now, if I wanted to use this again, what I would do is take it to the sink and with cold water, I would wash out all the acrylic paint. Make sure I got rid of everything. When you're doing screen printing, you don't want the paint or ink to dry in the screen. It will make it unusable. So once I wash it out with some water and clean it, I can let that water dry and it's good to go again. I might even check it after I'm rinsing it out to make sure that the glue is still here. Sometimes when you wash it away, it might take off some of the glue or some of the paint. You can just go back in with another layer and paint over the little holes you see. Make sure it's still opaque when you hold it up to light, and it's still good to go. So that is how you can screen print pretty easily. It took me about 10 minutes to make my screen and to go ahead and print. It's a fun activity to do and one I encourage you to do at home. And if you can, come see the artwork that inspired it in the new exhibition, The F Word, We Need Female. Thank you everyone for joining us today.